join the class that way if they can't join us, especially tonight for our concluding class. And I've heard from at least 5 of you just today saying, okay, don't let us off the hook here. Take us to the next place, or help us go to that next place, is saying, like I said, we start with the what, the so what, and take us to the now what. And I appreciated the eloquent language Catherine in particular used. I called you out, Catherine, but just sometimes we kind of light on fire around some of these topics, but then the fire dwindles out. And so she challenged me and us today as we go into this study to think about how we're going to kind of keep this fire alive. And so I appreciate that energy and that commitment you're feeling. Some of us are ready to march in lots of different ways. And so a big part of our time today is, as Ken and I envisioned it, was really thinking about the now what, and thinking about how we're in this together, not only as a class group that's been open to some new understandings, but also as a church. So thank you for joining us tonight. Linda Marshall, would you be willing to open us with prayer tonight? Well, you need to go ahead and unmute. Thanks.
Let's pause first and take a moment to center our hearts and minds. Oh God, in these brief moments of silence, we pause and take in your world that is hurting and yet filled with glory and possibility. Help us to stay focused on your goal of your mission to bring your love to the world, and to be your love, and to receive your love. Keep our hearts and minds open this evening as we move forward in this study. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Reverend Marshall. It's great to have lots of folks who are among us who have led congregations through these conversations in the past, and we're building on the legacy of so much of that work, and I'm grateful. Ken, I set up that you and I can both share screens, so we've got that going for us now. So I'm going to go ahead and share the screen with our outline for tonight. We have here, of course, that we're in our last, let me get to my slideshow. Shoot, I'm not able to reach that. There we go. There we go. There's our learning objective and learning covenant. I think we've learned that pretty well. Here's our centering moment. And what I thought we'd do for tonight, just kind of in the spirit of closing this study and thinking about next steps, is I'm going to read this kind of in a Lectio Divina kind of a moment, if people are familiar with that. That's where you can read scripture and then create space for just letting some of the words that are especially resonating with you soak on you a little bit more by naming just that phrase or those words that mean something new to you now. After having done this study together and done this reading, and even as we're finishing up chapter 12, I just invite you to listen to this, and then just in a moment orally to share what are the words or images that are popping out to you now because of our study, that maybe you would have read at the beginning of this study differently than you're reading now. So D'Angelo says, I have a racist worldview, deep racial bias, racist patterns, and investments in the racist system that has elevated me. Still, I don't feel guilty about racism. I didn't choose this socialization, and it could not be avoided. But I am responsible for my role in it. To the degree that I have done my best in each moment to interrupt my participation, I can rest with a clearer conscience. But that clear conscience is not achieved by complacency or a sense that I have arrived. So I invite you just to let the words soak on you a little bit, and as you feel moved, just and we'll speak on top of each other. That's okay. Just share any words or phrases that have a new meaning for you because of our learning together.
Responsible.
Yeah, that was mine.
responsibility more precisely for me.
You interrupt my participation.
Socialization.
Not achieved by complacency.
I didn't choose this socialization, but I'm responsible for what I do in the future.
Investments in the racist system that has elevated me.
The racist system that has elevated me.
Deep racial bias.
This may have been one of those parts of the book that had we not read the whole book, we might have just glanced over or glossed over, right? But I think when we've done some really hard and good learning personally, interpersonally, and some reflection, these kinds of statements and at the end of a book are so weighty and have so much to remind us about from where we've come. I don't know if you all were drawn or got to see the image, the most poignant image of John Lewis's casket being carried over the Pettus Bridge today.
Yeah.
What a profound image. And he was one who would often say, you know, yeah, we've got a lot of work to do and a lot of good trouble to make, but we've also come a long way. And that was both heartening and also frustrating, right, as an image that we are where we are, and yet we are where we are. And this, I think, centering moment helps us remember that too. So thanks for sharing that. So for our small group time, our breakout sessions, and I think we have about 15 folks, so we'll have about 5 groups of 3. Wanted to create a space again, like we have with these breakout groups, to have you just get a chance to think through some of the implications of these personally, and then Ken and I are going to talk about some of the implications of our work together kind of corporately. So the first one, if you want to take a picture of this or jot down the idea so you don't lose the idea for your breakout. D'Angelo has invited us to shift from a defensive reaction to a transformed paradigm. And that's a big part of what chapter 12 is about. And just kind of unpacking in our small group what that means for us. Maybe if you've found yourself somehow in that shift, and we may not, I would suspect we're not all there in arriving at the transformed paradigm, but how have we experienced that? And then where'd you hear yourself in the statements and responses on page 142 and 143? If you have the book, I know some of us have the ebook, so our pages don't jive, but those of us in the small groups can refer to those. But there's a lot of comments and ways of engaging the world around race, ways that we have spoken or ways that we have thought. And just wanted you to look at there. When I look at my pages, those 2 pages, I see a lot of, oh yeah, I did this, I've said this, yeah, I felt this. So maybe you can refer back to those pages and find what some of those statements did to help you find some language. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop share so we can get back into our small groups. We've got 16 folks, so we'll have one group of 4. And let's go ahead and take about 20 minutes. And this will be our last breakout time. We won't have one later on in the gathering. Any wisdom that came out of your shared gathering that you want to highlight or just lift up?
I think one of the things that we talked about a little bit is that I would do things differently. Having read this book, studied this book, I would do things differently, I hope, than I did 3 years ago when we got co-pastors. When we changed, I would respond in different ways to some things that happened then. I mean, I realize this looking back and not looking forward, but
that's really important, Mary, and thanks for sharing that insight. I wish we had the time to unpack all that, but that's something to capture. Thanks for sharing.
Well, in our group from Trinity last week, we had an online interview with Akila Bixler, and whom you know, her experience down in Douglas County.
That's
And
terrible.
the racism that basically drove her out, and she couldn't take it. I don't know. You were her mentor, Amy?
Yeah, so Akila Bixler was one of the associate pastors, the executive pastor at St. Andrew United Methodist Church in
Yes.
Highland Branch. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Came to us from New York.
I'm sure part of the milieu there is that Douglas County is considered the 6th richest county in America.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole economic system. I mean, I was moved by the way we talked about trying to buy an automobile and being ignored by automobile dealers. And which relates to what we said, when are there opportunities, you know? My opportunity, formative opportunity, was when my niece married a black man, and I presided at the wedding, and so there it is. As I've said in my churches, formative for the understanding of LGBTQ is when somebody comes out who's part of a family of 150 people in your congregation, you know, and suddenly grandma is talking about her grandson, whom she loves dearly.
Right.
And don't you mess with my grandson. You know, and that those opportunities come along, but maybe not that frequently. I feel blessed by Tristan's presence in our family. But otherwise, and I'm in a neighborhood that's about as white as a sheet, you know.
Thanks for sharing that, Sam. Yeah, I mean, this conversation becomes personal in lots of ways and tends to help us look at things differently.
Amy, I was curious, I mean, we talked in our group about it, but with others, if people have felt that they have been really defensive in the past when they've been called out or, you know.
sometimes.
You're referring, Katie, to the congregation or us personally?
No, personally, people, you know, have you, because I mean, some of the examples she cites in her classes of how people just explode, and I think, is that what everyone does?
Yeah. I can say for me, it's not so much that I feel defensive. I'm appalled by my behavior. Is what it comes down to. If I ever say or do something that offends anybody, regardless of the reason, it strikes me because it's never an intended thing, you know. And anything I try anyway to not be maliciously hurtful to anybody, right? And I hope, you know, I'm assuming everybody is like I assume positively, on the side of positivity for people. So to me, the idea that somebody could have thought that I could have said something maliciously is hard to take, but it also is a learning thing for me. And in those cases, I mean, regardless of what the situation is, I try to ask them, oh my gosh, what did I do? I'm so sorry. I can't believe I did this. I don't expect you to, you know, be my teacher. I just tell me what it is I did wrong so I can go learn.
Mm-hmm.
Well, about defensive, I felt pretty defensive after reading the first chapter of the book.
Mm-hmm.
What am I getting myself into here?
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, Alan, and I appreciate you leaning into that. Yeah, and that's just an indication, right, of the white superiority and the racist culture that we're a part of. Is that automatically we flare up with defensiveness. I appreciate that honesty.
Do we have any psychologists in the group? Practicing therapists? Because there were a couple of things that said to me, I wonder what a trained therapist would say about this. Like, for instance, when a white woman cries, get up and leave the room. Several things like that, or the statement that says a positive white identity is an impossible goal. Well, then what are we doing here? I don't know. There's certain things that seem to violate norms of modern psychology. For instance, well, anyway, we're always told, I've had therapy, my wife and I have, because we're both ministers. Any family that has two ministers should have a regular therapist.
Any family with one, Sam, needs
one. That's right.
Okay, with one. Okay, well, anyway, and one of the things I always tell you, well, you're responsible for your own feelings. I mean, what people say, a half the reaction is who you are when you take in what they say. Yeah, and well, anyway, that was just a thought that I had.
There was something very interesting on NPR a couple weeks ago about, it was an interview with an African-American woman, psychologist, therapist. And they were talking about, why did you go into this field? She said, because we represent such a small minority in psychotherapy and in counseling in that field. And what she realized was that as she was struggling with issues and seeking out counselors, nobody understood the microaggressions, the pain that she had been experiencing with all this work that D'Angelo unpacks. And so to your point, Sam, even that question of, you're responsible for your own thoughts, sometimes that can even be a veiled experience out of our white privilege, can't it?
Well, if I heard you correctly, yes, counselors, if you're not trained specifically to deal with the Black milieu of racism in this country, that's a whole different ballgame.
That's right.
Yeah,
well, let's move on. We're gonna go ahead and move on. Thank you for processing a little bit of what you all brought up, and I know it'll continue to bubble up through our time tonight. Let me go back to our screen share real quickly. Here were the topics that Ken and I wanted to spend a little bit of time and just some content sharing around the practices for interrupting racism, and we'll lift those up in just a minute. You don't need to find them on your pages. What's a vision for a church that interrupts and repairs racism? What's a vision for a church that lives as an anti-racist community? So we'll be thinking about that and talking about what that might look like. And then our own response to racism as we move forward. Again, if you guys want to offer any chat questions, you can do that through the chat, and those will pop up even though we're screen sharing too. So feel free to share those. So one of the techniques or strategies that D'Angelo talks about is how do we interrupt racism within ourselves or when we're encountering folks? How many of you have had those moments where you're in a group or you're in some kind of a setting or even just a one-on-one conversation and somebody says something and we just stepped into that space of racism or white supremacy and it surprises us, it jolts us, and sometimes we walk away and think, oh man, I didn't say anything. I didn't interrupt anything. What she suggests is that that's okay. If you read chapter 12, of course it is, but never to let that just kind of linger in the air, to go back and revisit it. She gives these strategies for interrupting racism, those kinds of moments, but I also want us to look at them from a perspective as a faith community. The list includes breathing, listening, reflecting, returning to the list of underlying assumptions. What are those assumptions that I have to be in touch with within myself? That's what I call in my language of recovering racism. I have to create space to be in touch with some of those things. Seek out someone if you feel confused. Talk it out with somebody. And then take the time to process your feelings, but do return to the situation. As I was reading this list, there were some elements of this that sounded like contemplative prayer. Did anybody else kind of look at that list and think, wow, that's kind of what we do in prayer. That's what we do in meditation. We breathe, we listen, we reflect. What's interesting about Interrupting Racism is D'Angelo doesn't start the list with go out and change the world. It kind of starts with us again, doesn't it? It starts with creating a space for our own reflection and our own self-knowledge. And what I'm going to suggest when we think about the church's response and how we might move forward is we always need to create a space where we're first of all looking at ourselves and kind of introspecting, but we can't obviously stay stuck there. Somebody was asking me from the congregation about this study and suggesting that it was too passive, that it wasn't starting with, get out into the streets and start marching. And what I suggested to this person is there's a place for that. And some of us are absolutely called to be those people. And yet for really changing, and I think this is a Jesus teaching, for really changing the world around us, we have to change. And so I really appreciated that she started us with that. And I would just encourage us as a takeaway from our lesson and our work together to always think about, okay, spend some time and space, Amy, just slow this down a little bit, do some reflection, because there may be something within my own reaction out of white privilege that could actually harm the situation or somebody else. Let's see if we have got a chat here. Sue you mentioned Reverend Bixler. Based on a bit of information, it appears that this is not the norm. There is a new 50 ways to welcome a new pastor list and no mention of interracial relations in different churches. Actually, Sue, just real quickly with Reverend Bixler's situation, we have in the Mountain Sky Conference, and several conferences do now, what we call cross-cultural appointment training opportunity that happens where congregations, it was my understanding that there was a minor amount of that even before Eric Smith's appointment to Arvada. Camille, you might be able to shed some more light on that. But my experience from both the pastor and the congregation's experiences of a lot of that training is it's never enough. And number one, and number two, it needs to be ongoing, not just before the pastor comes, but as you're relating to one another and learning things and awarenesses come, kind of like this study, we need to come back into that conversation and do that work. So just to refer back to that. And I love what Betsy's saying. Yeah, I'm starting with the man or the woman in the mirror. That's exactly right. Let's move on to a vision for the church that interrupts racism. Before I'm going to go back because I don't want to get our head into that space yet. I want to just ask you to go back to elementary school. For some of us, that's going to be way, way back. But go back to elementary school and imagine, and for some of us, it's not an imagination because it actually happened, being a new kid at the elementary school.
Yeah.
And then remember the experiences that would happen around the cafeteria. And imagine 3 scenarios. It's lunchtime. You've had to navigate where the lunch lady is and how to pay money. And first of all, how to get to the cafeteria. For some of us, there's some PTSD memories around some of this. Imagine 3 scenarios. The first one being after you've gotten your food on those cheap plastic trays where they kind of slop the food on, if you're old enough to remember those days when the school cafeterias weren't food courts like they are today. And you walk into a room and everybody's in their seats, all with their groups of friends, and you've got to find out where you're going to go, right? How many of you remember those days, that moment? Okay, the second scenario is you walk into the room, you've gotten your tray of food, you've enjoyed some time with the friendly food lady, the checkout lady, and somebody at the table, at one of the tables full of girls or boys, waves to you as a newcomer and says, "Come sit with us." Okay, think of how that felt. Okay, third scenario. Even before you get into that line, another child, doesn't matter what gender they are, another child comes up to you and says, "I know you're new. I'll show you, I'll walk with you through the line and we'll go find a place to sit together to get to know each other." That's kind of Fantasyland cafeteria moment in grade school, I know. But think about the different feelings and the different power there, okay? And now we can go to this next slide. One of the values in the missional language that's very important to Arvada United Methodist Church is the idea of the room at the table. And forgive me if I start stepping on some feet, but just go with me on this and see if you can resonate with what I'm talking about. The room at the table language and that kind of an image to an outsider can feel a lot like the first cafeteria scenario, right? We've got room at the table for you to come, but we're going to set the table. We're going to decide the rules of what time we come to the table, the mood and the food and the conversation that's going to happen at that table. And by the way, we've got a ritual and a routine that is our table also, right? So we might think, okay, if that's not the way that we want to be in a conversation around racial diversity and racial repair, maybe we'll have a takeout table. And that's kind of leaning into an idea that we're thinking about as a church right now, which is instead of us sitting at the table and deciding how we're going to bring people to us, what about we have something really good as a church, and so we're going to take it out to the folks in our community around, for instance, racial discourse. Now, what's somewhat problematic about that model, right, is what are we still in control of? Just shoot out. What are we still in control of if we're doing the takeout table?
Message.
Message?
Yeah, what you're serving.
What you're serving?
Where we go.
Yeah, we choose the table. The people at the table choose where we're going to go. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to ask us back to that elementary school moment to imagine the third scenario. What would it look like for us to be a part of an image, for lack of a better word, that is community cafe, where we're gathering not according to the rules that one privileged or majority group sets, but we're gathering around a common opportunity or a common question. How do we repair racism? And people choose to come to that conversation. And I love, this is an image from a cafe, outdoor cafe in Berlin. And I just love this image. What are some elements of this image that resonates with an idea of kind of that third moment in the elementary cafe? Around power, around agenda setting, around what people are eating. What are some images there that resonate with this idea of a cafe?
Well, people choose their seat.
Uh-huh.
And so they're probably going to be sitting with people that they don't know, because that's where the empty seats are. Mm-hmm. They're drinking beer and wine. That ought to loosen people up.
So did Jesus, right, Sue?
Yeah, right.
What are some other images that stir your mind a little bit?
It's open air, and so not as controlled. It's not like anybody can control it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what to say, but I see staff there. The two guys in the black pants and the white shirts, one to the left, and then one in the background further to the right. I don't know, what does that image say to us of the servants, if you will?
The role of hospitality, right? Creating a generous space, perhaps,
Well, I mean, they go where the customers are.
right? Is there a sense of, this is my table area, and I'm going to kind of have, for lack of a better image, the pews that I sit in? Or is there kind of a transient kind of a feeling as you look at this picture?
I went to school in a very German city. So this is Berlin.
Mm-hmm.
And it was common in the German restaurants to have a large community table. You had your booze, you had your small tables, but there was one long table where anybody who was alone or maybe a couple, they could sit at the community table.
And that's very much kind of the image here. And what I want us to imagine is, out of our Wesleyan Christian faith, God does have a vision for this kind of a coming together around race. Our Wesleyan theology is one that reminds us that we are born into and have a propensity to sin. The sin of division, the sin of brokenness, the sin of racism. But God calls us to and gives us a different vision in Christ, a vision of what we call perfection in Wesleyan theology. And a lot of us have troubles with that, because I'm telling you, I'm not thinking I'm going to be perfect in this world. But Wesley said, don't bother worrying about that, but strive for and grow into perfect love of God and humans. That's what perfection is. And he also said over and over, we can't do that by ourselves. We can only do it by the grace of God and the Holy Spirit. We can only do it by the power of a community that grows us and helps us change and move into that perfect love of God and humans. We do it through our own spiritual disciplines and practices. What I want us to imagine tonight is there a vision, much like King had when he said, I have a dream? Is there a vision for creating that kind of a space as a church, not where we set all the rules and set the table and people come to us, or where we have the rules and we're going to disperse those and take those out, but where we create this kind of community cafe where ideas are generated on the terms of everybody that finds themselves at those tables? So we're going to think about tonight, with Dr. Ken's leadership too, about what would our role in that be, and what would be some of the next steps we could take in that. But before we do that, whoops, sorry, Ken. Let me suggest that I think we start that kind of work and leading into that kind of a vision by taking this next step. And I just want to kind of lay this on us, and then Ken's going to help us find our places in all this. Could we create out of this class a cohort that continues listening and learning and acting in relationship with our external community? Now, what I mean by that is, could a small cohort of folks that feel called out of this study to take these next steps, could a small cohort do some listening, meet with civic leaders, talk with police, meet with teachers and educators in our community to learn how we would create this kind of a cafe? Now, as Methodists, of course, any cafe is going to have food, right? But it's about the listening and the sharing space where there's more of an equality of power. Could this cohort then invite the congregation into this listening and learning? So this vision might be an 8 to 12 month process of coming together and deciding how are we going to go out into our community and really listen, not with a potluck dish that we want to give to people, but an opportunity to imagine a feasting table where everyone is welcome and everyone has equal power. And then that cohort, as it's listening and learning, would work with me as the pastor and Reverend Megan as the pastor to teach us and share what they're learning So we can include that in sermons and stories and videos, so that we could literally begin to then take those learnings and connect with our existing ministries to mobilize action. So imagine if this cohort said, you know, there's an opportunity for us to do some racial work around with Hispanic people in community. And it will involve food. So maybe Faith in Action, maybe that's a team that could help us make some of those connections. Because we already got these great teams in our church that can help us mobilize a lot of these things. But who's doing that listening and that learning? That is so very critical. I have found that the most transformative energy that works in a congregation to make substantial systemic change starts with listening and learning and sharing and inviting. It doesn't start with getting up in the pulpit and saying, hey, I've just had this brainstorm moment of us being anti-racist. Will y'all join me? Doesn't work, does it? And chances are, as you look at the history of the congregations that have formed us, when we've attempted to do that, usually, like to Catherine Plummer's earlier point, the light goes out pretty quickly. So let's think about that kind of cohort. And here's a cool thing. Ken Bedell has agreed to facilitate that cohort, as we would feel interested in being a part of that. And having his gentle and authoritative guidance and facilitation through this, I think, is just such a rich gift. So Ken's going to take us now. Let me just ask real quickly if there are any questions, comments, or thoughts about this material before he helps us think about the way we make responses. You don't have to put it in the chat. You can just speak it out loud if you want.
Amy, what do you anticipate is an ongoing goal of learning and discovering what the needs are, or how?
Yeah, I mean, ideally, it'd be about an 8 to 12 month cohort. Maybe they agree to meet monthly, but then they say, okay, for instance, Lindy's got great connections. I'm calling you out, Lindy. Lindy's got great connections to the school system as a former educator. You know, Lindy could say, I'm going to go and set up an appointment with the superintendent, and or with one of the, you know, I don't know how the structure works in Jeffco schools, but the vice superintendents around middle school or whatever, to learn what the issues are and how conversations need to happen around race in our schools. And then she would come back and talk to the group, and Ken would help facilitate that. Wow, what are we learning about that we could learn as a congregation? And this, to some folks, will feel like a passive process, but it is not. It's Jesus going up to the mountaintop to pray before he comes into the valley to do the work, right? It is a part of the work. It's not saying, we're just going to lay fallow now for 12 months. It's really moving us into a different space.
I'd like to check something out with you, Amy. It seems to me that a critical piece, even as it begins, is to look for partners.
Yes.
And so that it isn't just listening and learning, but looking at ways to find partners in the process, and to have so that that's just kind of recognized that the process of learning is also to engage others, and that it isn't just to find out, but to be clear about actions that are possible. Or possible that where it is that people care about having something happen, and so that the interest isn't in learning, but as you say, acting throughout external community, but that it's that is the recognized goal of which is exactly. You say that, it's my experience that kind of program results in understanding that's hard to get in another way, particularly as the action part starts of gaining an understanding that's hard to get in some other way. So.
Precisely. Thank you so much, Ken. Yeah, those community partnerships. This isn't something that's just our work to do. Absolutely. Some of you with the social justice team I know have met with Together Colorado. They're a group of interfaith leaders in our area that are doing a lot of this work. We don't have to replicate it. We don't have to try to invent it. So much of it's already going on, but it's around developing those partnerships. Absolutely. Thank you for that. Ken, you're on.
Okay. Let's see. You're gonna share the screen with me. Is that right?
Right. I've shared that.
My screen. You're
Yeah,
gonna let me share my screen.
Right. That's right.
Okay. Here we go. I think, do we see my screen that says America Without Racism?
Yep.
Yep,
Okay.
it's there.
Well, what I hope to do in the next just couple of minutes is to really step back and like Amy was just taking us into, okay, let's see what we're actually going to do. And I'd like to just take a moment to think about what is the larger context for all of that. And so that's really an issue. What would America look like without racism? And I got three things that I'll just throw out there. These are starting points, even in my mind, not kind of the end all, but a way to lead into a conversation about what's the big picture of where we're going. That without racism, we'd eliminate barriers that are greater for non-whites. That all groups would participate fully in American life, so that there'd actually be a full representation in the people who are making movies and the people who are writing and bringing us the news and the people who are in the Congress and the Senate, and that there would be a shared commitment to each other, that what King called the beloved community, so that this is the going on to perfection that Amy was talking about. So what is it in terms of racism that are the way that it's currently being expressed that we need to root out? And the stereotypes are the big one. This is what we've been talking about basically in this whole series, and what I think D'Angelo is really good at helping us see that the way that we perceive ourselves, the way that we perceive others, the stereotypes that get used, we can never get beyond racism unless that's faced personally and faced collectively. And then there's those racist institutional practices. The one that we were just talking about, having the mentality of, well, we've got a great program at our church. Why don't we get Hispanic and Black people to come and join in on our great program? Because we've got an open table where they'd be welcome to come and do our thing. Where are those places that we can root out just the practices that are part of our world? And finally, there are the racist institutions like the criminal justice system, and in many ways the educational system, that actually support racism, that make it part of what gets reinvented every day, gets supported by every generation. It's the institutions like the criminal justice system. So if we start with stereotypes, and this is just kind of what I got from all of our conversations, that there's a point of kind of conversion, of saying, okay, I'll recognize, if we do it in Christian terms, I recognize the sin in my heart, and then what Paul wrote to the Romans, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. And that that's the starting point for dealing with the stereotypes. So institutional practices, again, this is something that we can all work on, is developing our sense to be able to recognize. I mean, we had probably, most of us hadn't really even given much thought to whether there's room at the table has anything to do with racism. I mean, we just, how do we kind of develop that sense of being able to see where there is racism, and then becoming interrupters to step in, and like Amy did tonight, to just bring, kind of shock us, to interrupt, or to try to help others see where there is this institutional practice that's just part of what's going on. And then the racist institutions that are part of that whole thing. These are the institutions like criminal justice, education, the economic system. So how do we react to those institutional things? I'd argue that there's only one way, and that is becoming an activist. That's to say, to join with others in changing the systems. And that you can't just say, oh, I'm going to worry about myself and overcoming my racism, or if I see something, I'm going to try and say something about it. But as long as the society has these institutions that are sustaining racism, like the way the economic system works at the moment, we can never be a country that is going on to perfection without racism. And so an activist can be starting by taking seriously the way we vote, to join with others who are participating. This is becoming an activist can be part of even going into the streets, whatever that without activism, without us working collectively to overcome racism, we won't be able to do that. So the expressions of racism, looking at exterminating racism, is overcoming stereotypes, becoming interrupters, and joining political movements. So that was an attempt to kind of pull back for a moment, and hopefully we can kind of put all of that as we're thinking about looking at needs and finding partners and what actions are useful, and the growth and understanding that comes out of that kind of activity. So where are we? Well, I think I like the idea of anti-racist, just like sometimes being a recovering racist is maybe another way to say that. But the reason I like anti-racist is because for me, when I think about it, it's taking action rather than just being an ally or being a recovering racist. That there's a, how do I actually take this on seriously? I like Micah's, where he said, the Lord has told us what's good. What he requires of us is this: to do what is just, to show constant love, and to live in humble fellowship with God. So we've got the show constant love, which is really overcoming the stereotypes, to live in love rather than in judgment and stereotypes, and to become interrupters, to do what is just, and to live in humble fellowship with God. I understand this to be part of God's movement toward building the kingdom, to be humble in that fellowship, but to work with others, to be part of the community of fellowship that is working for the time when we're serious about God's kingdom. So I'm going to turn that, I'm going to slow down, turn that back to you, Amy.
Thanks so much, Ken. So let's spend some time. We've got some important time now to process. Where do we think we are with our next steps? How do we want to make a response? The now what?
The cohort group sounds very interesting. So I like the formation of that.
So do I, Catherine. I think to me, the idea of starting with the cohort and sort of like spreading us out into, sort of like we've started some of the process, and see if we can, how we can draw more people in to help us in the movement, because it's going to take more than 16 people, 17 people. So.
Amy, are you at all envisioning any kind of a congregational study? Like we have Advent studies.
Well, I mean, that may be a possibility. The other, one of the things we know is that there's usually, around this kind of a moment, the Black Lives Movement moment and everything, there were people initially that said, we've got to be learning together, and you all are it. And now I think what we need to do is think about how we multiply the opportunities. So, for instance, now we have 6 videos and PowerPoints of this class that maybe somebody on our call could say, well, I'll offer to lead this with our UMW, a UMW circle who might be interested, or with a young families group in our church. So I think we can kind of exponentially grow our learning that way. Certainly, I think a model to think about is kind of like our green team. Our green team, and Lindy's a part of that. I'm trying to think of any others of you also on this call. Oh yeah, Linda. The green team is doing this kind of work around ecology and creation care. They're listening, they're learning, they're gathering resources, they keep me informed about issues that we might want to think about as a congregation, to your point. Catherine, how responses can get made. The green team is going to go to each of the ministry teams of our church and say, how can we help you think about ecology and creation care in the context of your circle group or your choir group or things like that. So I think this group gets to figure that kind of an opportunity out. A congregational study may be that, but we know we're going to get a smaller group of people that want to do a study, and other folks are going to say, we want to wait and find out what the schools need, and then we'll get on board. People will get on board in different ways.
Yes. Okay.
Amy, if I can just kind of jump in just for a second. Earlier you'd mentioned about our pastoral staffing from 3 years ago. And I think one of the things that, it's like timing is everything, right? So had what's going on now happened 3 years ago, I can't tell you what would have happened with our staffing. But I do think that things might have been different, just because there would be a lot more awareness of what was going on, and then being able to work with our diverse staff. But one of the things that we did as a church, and I take blame just as, I don't know if blame is the right term, but we didn't do our due diligence in following up, like you mentioned. We didn't continue the process. And I think what we're doing right now, starting with this class, and then the small cohorts, and then going out to the various groups within the church, and spreading tentacles out into our community, both interior and exterior to the church, is key. It's really key. And I think the intent is there. And I think a lot of us have learned, myself included, of what happened then, as opposed to now. So, yeah.
Hold on. I think Sam thought he was off the call, but there we go. Thanks, Camille. And personally, there may be some healing work that some of you feel led to do with Eric out of this learning. And I would encourage you to do that if in fact that's something that you're feeling called and led to do out of that time. I appreciate that, Camille. And that's the work of God's grace. These opportunities to learn and grow from those moments will come in lots of different ways and forms. I appreciate you naming that.
Sure.
I was just thinking, Amy, that we're not the first group of people that have kind of thought about moving in this direction. Another thing that we might spend a little bit of time on is just talking to some people. I think of a parallel program that's going on in Nigeria to get Christians and Muslims to talk together. And there's a program there where they're working on, and in many ways, exactly kind of the way you were talking about, of start out with people who are willing to come together and then thinking about, well, what do they share in terms of a need together, and then how can they start working on that? And one of the interesting things about that one that I'm a little bit familiar with is that then when COVID came, there were leaders in the community ready to be working together on responding, instead of just the Muslims going off this way and the Christians going this way. And so just kind of seeing the learnings, for example, the learnings that they had might really help us in Arvada to.
Absolutely. And Ken, I know you're a treasure trove of a lot of those kinds of connections and centers that are doing that kind of work around the world. I'm familiar with the racial work that's being done through racial reconciliation work that's being done through Duke University and the Divinity School down there. We don't have to invent the wheel. There's a lot of models out there. But I think what I found in my learning around these topics is that this is kind of a core framework for starting that work, is that listening and learning and partnership development. Yeah.
I think one of our challenges is going to be doing this sort of in a vacuum, because there aren't a lot of, Arvada doesn't have a high minority population. So there may be a lot of people who've never had friends or interacted a lot. And, you talk about all the ideals and that's great, but it's hard. I don't know. I think it's a challenge. I'm not sure how we get around that.
Very much a challenge, Katie, and also the other thing to remember, and we're discovering this, this isn't a new discovery, but something that we're bumping up against with a lot of other of our program ministries, is that Arvada United Methodist Church is not just an Arvada church, right? We are a regional church, drawing people from the city, drawing people from Jeffco, but also other counties. So there are resources and spaces that we can be in that feel a little bit more diverse. But yeah, that's going to be one of our challenges. Doesn't keep us from doing the work, but it's something that we have to acknowledge. Well, here's what I would suggest, is that if you have an interest in calling and just taking that next step of exploration around this kind of a cohort, if you would email me. I think you all have my email address, but just in case, it's pastoramy@arvadaumc.org, and let me know, and then I can connect you all with Ken, and we can be thinking a little bit about what this means, and the group will figure out its covenant and its way of gathering. This isn't going to be a top down. That in itself would be my executing power over the lay people of our church. And that's not, I've learned a lot from Arvada folks, and that's one of the things I've learned not to do. So, so that would be something that the group would decide and think about in its growing together and its formation work. And email me if there's other things that you feel called to do too. The important thing about this is it's not staff driven. It's a ministry of the laity and retired clergy in our congregation who want to help the congregation and help ourselves move forward in realizing a vision of anti-racism, to Ken's point.
I think this group being a kind of a catalyst will be helpful, because we've done some intentional work, not that we're finished with it, but that's a group to start with. And I think our awareness will help us to jumpstart the process. And having Ken, you leading us with that, and setting a covenant and setting more clear goals will be helpful for me to get some clarity on that.
Well, let me share real quickly on the share screen that a part of finishing up any learning experience together is to invite you to take an evaluation. I mean, even when I go to Kohl's or the grocery store, they've got me filling out surveys. So this is a part of our life together, and it's really an important part for our feedback. Whoops. This is a Google Doc that you can go to fill out a quick survey. It'll take 5 minutes. So the way to get this link is either to go onto the PowerPoint, or if you want to take a picture of it now and go to it that way, or I'll leave it up for just a minute if you want to write it down. It is case sensitive. I'm sorry, I made it as short as I could. So if you want to go ahead and take a picture of it or write it down, you can. And then it's like an email that you send to that, that you just go to that site on Google, and then it'll open up a survey that you can take, and it'll come right back to Ken and me so that we can see that. Okay. So if you decide to go to the PowerPoint, you can link onto that or copy and paste it to be able to use that. Okay. I'll keep that up for a minute in case you're taking pictures or writing down information on that. And I'm just going to ask us as we conclude tonight, any just closing thoughts about your learning or your experience about the class as we bless each other on our way of being people that are growing in grace and faith through the conversation of race and faith.
Amy, I just want to say from Missouri, thank you for letting me crash your party.
Oh, we're glad you did, Bets.
I have thoroughly enjoyed this. It's fun to be with you again, Amy, and just in a learning way. That was always fun. But you've given me lots to think about and lots of things to share as my daughter and I continue our conversations, and lots to share. I'm hoping that there are others at our church that are reading this book. Right now, it's hard to know with us all so separated. You don't know what anybody's doing, but I'm hoping that I'll begin to find that there are people doing that. But thanks for letting me be a part. My best wishes and love and God bless to Arvada. I'll be there to visit one of these days when I get to Colorado.
Great. Thanks, my friend. So glad to have you join us, and remind us that we're sharing this work, not just in our community, but all around the world, especially with our Methodist family. Thanks for joining us, Bets.
You're welcome.
Any others as we wrap up?
I'm just so glad so many people have been able to really express what they've been going through and express their vulnerabilities, because it wasn't easy for I would imagine all of us to say some of the things we probably did, especially in our breakout groups. And I personally am very I'm in admiration of everybody who took part in this course. So.
I appreciate the comprehensive approach that you and both of you and Ken and Amy have given, which created a safe place that I knew that it was safe to be vulnerable and to learn and stay with the process. So thank you.
I just want to thank Amy and Ken for your time in creating the slides. You extended our knowledge with these excellent slides. And Ken, we were very much blessed to have you amongst us. And I'm kind of all goosebumpy about you taking this cohort group. So it's very, very awesome, and we appreciate you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, it's, I guess it's an opportunity. You know, when you retire, then you think, what is it, what is there that you can kind of do? And I appreciate Amy's encouragement and kind of the opportunity to say, well, let's see what we can do. And so that's, and have felt, there's times when I felt, what am I doing going to a church with all of these white people? And I think this is the reason. You know, I'm feeling very good about that.
I'm getting some folks saying that they have an interest in helping with the cohort. Thanks so much, and feel free to go ahead and email me too, because this chat I won't have with the recording, and so if you'll just remind me and email me, and hopefully we could be turning around the touch point with that cohort pretty quickly, don't you think, Ken?
Sure.
Yeah, certainly before summer ends. I mean, summer's almost gone anyway.
Right.
Well, I want to affirm the risk that you all took as a congregation and as this cohort of learning to do this work together. There's a lot of churches that'll email a pastor as Black Lives Matter kind of comes into this new place and says, what are we going to do? And what that means is, what are you going to do? And I really appreciate that that you all understand a call on not only our own individual hearts, but on the hearts of our congregation to do this work together, because it's not easy, and it's not sexy. It's not without a lot of mess and pain, but I think we have grown a lot as a cohort. I know I have, and will continue to help lead the church with grace and humility through this time. So thank you. And Ken, really, truly, what a privilege it was to co-teach with you and facilitate. This guy is just a gift to work with. And we both said today, we're going to miss our Sunday morning meetings to get us ready for our classes. So, but thanks so much, Ken. You've dedicated your life to this work, and we were the recipients of a lot of that wisdom. So thank you for that.
My wife would listen in sometimes to the Sunday morning conversations, and she said, well, Amy has an idea, and Ken, you think it's a good idea, and then you have an idea, and Amy says, that's a good idea. So I've proposed to my wife that she and I should take on that strategy and see how that works for a while.
You've made something work with 50 plus years, so I know I know you figure that out. Well, Ken, would you be willing to close us in a time of prayer?
Sure.
Thanks.
We turn to you, God, like we always do, with a sense of awe and wonder, and at the same time a sense of just how could all of this be possible. But we know that you're in everything that we are around, everything that we are part of, and help us to always look for your presence in not our lives, but in the lives of those who are around us. Open our eyes to see your presence and your working, even when we don't know exactly what to do. Help us to see that we're only trying to find the place that you would lead us to. And in this, we ask that you would help us to not only worry about our own activities, but to worry about how we can keep ourselves open to your guidance. We thank you for all the people that have been part of these discussions and the sharing and the learning that we've had from each other. I just praise you and thank you, God, for the experience that I've had in listening and hearing the conversations, and for the opportunity to work with Pastor Amy. Now, as we know that we won't be gathering in future weeks, we just keep each other in our thoughts and prayers. This we ask in Jesus' name, who came that we might know you better. In his name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thanks to you all so much. We'll be putting this session up on the PowerPoint also. So feel free to get those to other folks too, and we'll look forward to getting your responses by email. Good night, my friends. Be well. Good to see you all. Take care.